Right. Yay. Okay. All right. Welcome all to the SUNY Oswego Strategic Planning Update. All right. So I thought I'd start a little bit to back up because I know the president came earlier last semester to Faculty Assembly and talked a little bit about the strategic planning and sort of why we do it. Right. And I guess my take on it, if you want my additional take, is that we don't rely on serendipity for success. In other words, people doing what they should be doing and doing great work separately without a cohesive plan, there are a lot of great things will happen, but you don't really optimize what you're able to do with the resources you have institutionally. So planning really sets priorities. So with two economists in this room right here, this room is 40% economist, I'm proud to say, here in South. But with two economists will tell you that scarcity means choices and choices mean costs. In other words, resources are limited, so you prioritize. And you pick what you think are actually your priorities to focus on, because we can't do everything we want. So you set these priorities, and now they make the lens for the decisions that we make and the framework for even day-to-day operations. And if they are priorities, then you manage what you measure. And so you want to think about how you actually measure whether these priorities and the goals you set with them are actually being met. So this is sort of why we go through the process of strategic planning. Strategic planning language originates corporate and it get very corporate-y, but the fact is it has some really important implications in higher education. It can be particularly important in times of austerity when you really need to focus on those priorities. There's a lot of guiding documents. So we have a really good history of planning. It's been recognized by external accreditors across programs and for the institution. And we have a lot of documents that are ready to feed into this process. With our new president, he offered a vision of expanding Oswego's promise and growth in the institution with Vision 4040. This builds on a current mission and vision. A long-serving president really gave us a mission and a vision that I think a lot of people have really bought into and really coalesce around and have a good sense of what we are, what we're about. And with that mission and vision have come the current institutional priorities. They actually fit and they map to SUNY's with the new chancellor. We have SUNY's 4 pillars, and we've actually signed on to this post-secondary value commission, which is with the Gates Foundation. And there's an action agenda, this ensuring equitable post-secondary value, an action agenda. And let me give you an idea of kind of how these are connected. Right. So for example, we have existing priorities from strategic planning process, and Oz priorities are student success, academic and creative excellence, inclusive community, and partnerships. And you can see they actually match very well with SUNY's own pillars designed by the chancellor. So the chancellor comes in and sets pillars that we're really on our way and have long been considered very important. And these really map into this post-secondary value commission as well. This idea of equalizing access, kind of removing inequities, completion gaps, but also how affordability is an impediment to the college experience, to not just access to college in the first place, but its completion, and overall promote social justice. So these things all really, they don't necessarily map one for one across these 3 columns, but holistically, we're sort of on the same page with a lot of what we look for at higher education here. Where are we now? So it was very important for the president, and I was pleased as I signed on that he did not want this to be a black box where he said, oh, we're starting this and some people are working on it somewhere in a room and then surprise, here's our plan. So that's what we don't want to happen. So, we launched with the town hall, again, talking about some of the guiding documents, the Vision 4040, and what the process was ahead. We've actually composed a steering committee, and there was a campus email about that with the members of the steering committee, and we've had a couple meetings. We've established these subcommittee categories, what we're going to call anchors, and we'll talk about those in a minute. In fact, the lion's share of this presentation today, we'll talk a little bit about what those are. And so in conjunction with the steering committee, I and my co-chairs, Scott and Mary, have kind of established these subcommittee categories. And this week's subcommittee invitations have gone out, and these invitations were based on people who self-volunteered through our Google form. We did a final ask among chairs, deans, and other unit heads across the divisions of the college to nominate. And so those kind of came into invitations that went out this week. And so we'll be hopefully within next week announcing the subcommittee membership too, and being able to update our website with that. Next week too, the subcommittees kind of have some initial meetings with the consultants, and the consultants are going to give them a charge and help focus their work and talk about what product or what outcome the subcommittees are expected to have. And we'll talk more about this as well. So that's where we are right now. So our subcommittees, I guess we call them anchors. We've called them institutional priorities and prior planning, but we thought we'd take a little bit off the lake and refer them as anchors, because these are ideas that anchor our institution as well. And these came out of discussions within the steering committee, right? Clear patterns involved. And as you'll see as I go through these, they're not really new things. We might have grouped them or think about them in different ways, but they really align with existing priorities and the SUNY system priorities here. So the first one we call equity-informed student success. So I'll just list these and we'll talk a little bit about each one. A vibrant faculty and staff, resourcing for sustainable growth, a regional presence, and cultivating a reputation for excellence. So the subcommittees, there's a subcommittee for each of these 5 anchors. So let's talk about each one in turn. And I will pause too and offer you a little chance to chime in too as we talk about each one. So here the idea is we've been learner-centered for a long time. And the idea is you maximize our student opportunities to learn, that all the operations of the college, decisions about resource allocation, whether it's physical design of spaces or hires, we talk about how does this maximize student opportunities to learn. When the consultants came to the steering committee, we just talked about this variety and depth and richness of experiences and opportunities that await students at Oswego in all different areas. And students of all different kinds of students, the diversity of students could find their place, and how there was a commitment to finding the resources to helping them have these opportunities as well. So it's done through this lens of equity and inclusiveness, right? So are these opportunities accessible to all? And there are barriers. There are obvious barriers. Study abroad opportunities are immense. There are obvious financial barriers and sometimes personal life barriers, right? And what have we done? We've designed alternative study abroad experiences too that don't require the same time commitment. We have some financial assistance for students, things like that. So anytime we look about opportunities to learn and acquire knowledge and skills, we're always looking at through this lens of how we make sure these opportunities can be available in some form to all of our students as well. So I would have to open it up and ask, what do you think is important in this area? As the subcommittee convenes to talk about this area, what kind of focus do you think they should have? Goals, metrics? Any thoughts, comments, criticisms, concerns? Okay. All right. So I guess this one's a no-brainer. All right, good. Silence is assent, just remember. Okay. A vibrant faculty and staff. All right. And so it was really important that everyone to kind of see themselves. So students, the staff at this university, it was important then in these anchors that everyone see that, they are priorities, and attention as an institution has to be paid to all of these areas. And so, faculty are here. We're here for a while. Some of them we wish we would leave, but we don't. The ones, whenever people stand for retirement, you're thinking it's never the ones I want to retire, but that's all right. So we're here. And so it's important that they're thriving and they're vibrant, right? Because they are this cornerstone and a continuity of institutional operation and institutional knowledge, right? And excellence in creative and scholarly pursuits. We see that in many areas. I'm very proud of our faculty accomplishment, but that happens through a recruitment and retention, right? We're with the changing student body and having faculty and staff where students see themselves, right? And seek out mentors is also important and an ongoing challenge. And I think this is really one where we could be doing a lot better than what we've been doing. So faculty and staff well-being, since the pandemic, that's been a big buzzword. And the question is how you accomplish that in a sustained way. I was in a meeting earlier this semester and said, well, faculty are tired. Oh, I'm so tired, right? And so how do we balance that? So how do we accomplish what we need to as an institution, right? We started with equity-informed student success, and with student success at the center, though, you can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I think that's the saying. And so how do we balance that to make sure that faculty and staff have well-being and a work-life balance as well? And our faculty and staff are models and mentors. They're academic mentors, but we actually see faculty and staff very active in the community. And so they also model that community engagement, right? A force for the common good in a region and beyond, and even globally. We want students to see that in faculty, right? In the community as well, and use them as models. So as many faculty and staff on this call, go ahead, Frank, give it to me.
I support a vibrant faculty and staff. I know that's a shocking.
That's a controversial take. Thanks, Frank.
So does this group look at, I mean, obviously resource allocation, as you said, we have limited resources. Is this a group that will also look at where those resources are utilized in terms of hiring faculty and staff?
I think so. I mean, I think, and I would note in these subcommittees, someone from institutional research and assessment is embedded in all of these committees, so they can grab that kind of data to inform the discussions that are going to happen, right? So, I mean, I think there are goals that will come out of the subcommittee process, and goals might be for where those resources are allocated, right? In terms of the creativity, we talked about creativity in research. You and I both know, Frank, there's widespread dissatisfaction with the amount of funding for travel, and there's a disparity based on the resources across schools and colleges and academic units. I mean, I think that's a legitimate topic to talk about, and decide how that informs the work of the subcommittee would be another example.
And presumably they're talking also about the question of diversity and hiring diverse faculty and retaining diverse faculty.
Absolutely. And the hiring, I think retains the important part. I said we could do better in this area, and I'm really thinking about the retention. Even in our corner of Mahar Hall there, and the social sciences along with history, who I consider an honorary social science, so I just put them in the group. But you know, the argument is, you know, we've recruited some great faculty. We haven't always been successful in retaining them for a number of reasons. Right, people come as professional couples, and sometimes they can't make their home here. There's a lot of reasons it happens, but there's competition to diverse faculty. I mean, we're not the only college that has come up with this idea, right? And so we have to think about the environment that we offer that makes our faculty want to stay as well. Anyone else? Yeah, Sandy.
I'm not a very well faculty member right now. Sorry, I'm kind of sick.
I can see that.
I would really like to, on this area of faculty retention and well-being. I mean, one of the things I've seen, especially I think coming out of COVID, is the issue of loneliness and social isolation of faculty. I mean, being a faculty member is kind of an isolated thing anyways. You know, you focus on your one area, you get awarded for doing this one thing. And I would say, you know, some schools and departments are probably maybe more social than others, but, you know, we have a lot of people living at a distance. So, you know, I think it's very different. I think of my first job at Plymouth State College, everybody lived there because there was nowhere else to live. You know, we all did everything together. It was very social. And that's really important for retention and that people, you know, enjoy. And I think SUNY Oswego tries to do that. But I don't know. I've watched this with older faculty members who are sort of on their own. They may not have family. I see it with new faculty, whether they're, you know, representative of diverse population or not. So I think I would love to see, I mean, I've always joked about this, but, you know, we need a big fire pit in the middle of campus and have a potluck in the middle of the day, you know, things like that bring people together and really focus on that. And I just want to put that out there. I think people have to feel welcome. They have to feel included. They have to feel like they have a social, you know, connection. And again, I've seen, just sort of observing, I think some departments and schools do that better than others, but it's a real important point, especially since COVID, when people are, remote or commuting or that kind of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the younger staff, and I was thinking of Frank's observation again in the social science corner and maybe beyond. There seems to be a younger cohort of faculty. I actually have Maggie over here on my left, typifies it, that have actually kind of found their people and their group, and they live in town. And I think that's been great. I think.
I'll echo that. Finding a community here has really made such a big difference in our quality of life, especially as transplants to the area, and not having those kind of social connections. And so, making that community. In fact, there's a huge group of us that live within like 4 or 5 square blocks from each other. So it is it is something that I think we, found each other. And I think it's something that university can certainly help facilitate a little bit more of.
Yeah. And I think, Sandy, you point to, the challenge is, I think different campuses have a culture that's going to be subject to geography.
Yeah.
And, I was part of a 2 professional couple where it was, he was not working in Oswego. He was in the Syracuse area. You decided where you lived, and you tended to live closer to Syracuse, the larger metropolitan area. And so, Baldwinsville or even Radisson particularly is like greater Oswego. So, I think, I wonder with that isolation, do you try and cultivate some cohorts in some of the areas where the commuting, whether it's in the city or whether it's in Baldwinsville, Liverpool, et cetera, we try and cultivate community too, in terms of those kinds of things as well.
And I think that's really important as we bring new faculty in. And if you have a department or a school that's, kind of older and, they're sort of set in their ways or they live places. And I just think it's really important that we reach out and support the new folks coming. Well, it doesn't matter about age, just that, they're new to the campus. So.
Yeah, and I think it's staff as well.
Staff,
I would too. We're talking about faculty, but I want to be clear to other words. It's a faculty kind of professional staff, and staff was in this anchor on purpose, right? It's a vibrant faculty and staff.
Right? Thank you.
Operations of the college. Okay. Anybody else? All right. So this next one is resourcing for sustainable growth, or optimizing for sustainable growth. I'll just reveal to you the steering committee wasted much time talking about whether it should be resourcing or optimizing. Sandy will appreciate it because she's super into the right verb. So you'll just know that we were very careful about verb selection. Okay. So the idea is, we want to be at a point of sustainable operations. So we have a vision that sets out an agenda for growth, right? But growth to a certain goal. And at some point you have a growth that you can manage and manage sustainably, right? No one wants to move from crisis to crisis, right? It's really exhausting. And so we're looking to optimize educational offerings and really trying to reach our goals from the Vision 4040 and really a sustainable size that better supports the institution and aligns operating budget with our resources. Right, so workforce and community needs are an expanding area. It's an area that recognizes the demographic challenges of upstate New York, the state of New York as a whole, right? By really looking at adult populations. We already have, Sandy here has the completion degree program. Our IPS program is targeting one area of older students that are partial credits and are looking to complete, or potentially certificate programs. Part of the Vision 4040 number is about certificates, maybe post-baccalaureate certificates, micro-credentials, things like that are meeting some specific needs that emerge as well. New and expanded programs need people to run and operate these programs, and they potentially need finances as well. So the idea here is we're looking for sustainability, both financial sustainability, but also environmental sustainability. We have a proud history. Deborah Stanley was one of the first presidents to sign on to carbon emissions commitments. There was only a handful of 30, and people what are you even, why is this even your lane, right? But she was an early leader about a sustainable future for institutions that sort of train for the future, that look to the future. And so that becomes a part of operations and all new construction. And the curriculum, I think we do a good job of designing and revising curriculum, right? I think, as someone who actually sees all the programs going through, whether they're new or revisions, I think we do kind of do this, make sure that we do this, that the curriculum really matches it. In some cases, some programs, there's also external mandates. School of Education would be very familiar with that there's changes in what you want. And the School of Business would be another example of external creditor that will dictate some changes to revising and refreshing the curriculum as well. But I think we have a lot of programs that are constantly looking at what are the expectations in the industry their students go to, and how's the curriculum need to change in order to meet it. So anyone have anything that you think should be a focus in this area in terms of resourcing for sustainable growth? Library resources. Okay, there we go. All right. Never forgetting the library. Never, ever. All right. So yes, library resources and. Okay, I see librarians. Librarians have represented today, and librarian lovers have represented today. So all love to the library. But all I think is the strategic planning process this year is also really with the kickoff of really designing for a connector that's going to connect Lanigan and Penfield, right? So thinking about what belongs in the library, what might lose in the connector, and then moving on to the redesign of Penfield and designing, physical plan to sort of match the functions that you want as well. That's kind of exciting because the library is a huge space. It's a huge space. Third floor, if you guys ever make it up there, is sort of this beautiful space filled with potential and windows and gorgeous views and all kinds of opportunities. Online and the Syracuse campus as well in terms of resourcing. Yep, and I think that's the challenge. I think our online programs have really been taking off. I think the Syracuse campus too, I think we can do with some targeted marketing, some targeted program, maybe some just-in-time type programming as well.
Well, I will say that as we talk about online programs and more diverse, we focus a lot on the physical infrastructure, but the technical infrastructure too will be a large component of that.
Yes. Yep, and I think as Scott mentioned, how do we assure that students have good experience? I know Sandy brings back isolation of faculty, but I think in a branch campus, making sure the branch campus feels like part of this whole college community, or well as people online who may never come to campus, right? And that's a real shift. I've taught a lot of online where some students were just taking some of their load online to balance the rest of their life, but actually had a campus connection to students that are completely online. And resource for it. So this is a resourcing issue, right? So these things would actually take a commitment, takes financial commitment for the human and the physical resources, physical plant resources in order to make them happen. And so we will have to prioritize, right? There'll be a lot of good ideas of things we need to do in this committee, but it will be incumbent on this committee in pursuing this anchor to really prioritize it. Sandy.
I just want to chime in again about the Syracuse campus. I mean, I've been, sort of trying to champion that for 11 years, and I just feel like it's going nowhere. And so if we're going to do it, we have to do it really well. And we have to have the resources and commitment. If we're going to offer programs there, that somebody has to say, okay, you can offer the whole program there, and we're going to give you the resources to do it. And even if 3 people sign up, we're going to run those classes until we get it going. That's the only way it's going to happen. Because right now, it's piecemeal, and faculty and chairs sign up to have a course and there's not enough people and they cancel. And we have students who are signed up for the Syracuse campus who've never taken a class at the Syracuse campus. They've done it all online, and that's not ethical. And so let's do it well, or let's not do it at all. I mean, I'm sorry, but I think that's something we have to really look at. I think it's a gem, but it's got to be done well. And that's going to need resources of people and money, and taking some risks on some programs that might make a go of it. So.
Scott?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Sandy is saying. And I mean, my perspective of the Syracuse campus since I've been here is it is a gem, but we've never really fully committed.
Right.
there, right? And you know, it's a bit of a, and we talk about this a lot at Dean's Council, that it's a bit of a chicken and egg
Mhm.
type problem, you know. You got to offer the programs to get the students, but if you don't have the students, it's hard to offer the programs, right? And what we're seeing right now, frankly, is, you know, it's becoming a very vibrant space for many of our graduate programs, which is a good thing. You know, but how, you know, Sandy's right. How do we find the right programs? And we've had some initial discussions, and I know that the president has asked Vicky and I to chair a task force to really sort of dig into the Syracuse campus and what we need to do there. To, you know, and to make the types of investments we need to, and think through the types of programming. It may not all be typical bachelor's, master's programs. It might be micro credentials. It probably will be. It might be certificate programs in order to get these numbers. But I know the president feels pretty strongly that it is a gem, and there's some opportunities there.
Anybody else? So our fourth anchor is a regional presence. And this is, you know, really an opportunity and both a responsibility, a regional public, right? Link local and regional communities. So it's right there in our mission for the common good. And that common good part, it's always been one of my favorite parts of the mission. And I think it really speaks to how you become really part of the region, a go-to in the region for all sorts of things, right? Not just intellectual, obviously there's the instructional mission, educational, right? But also cultural and entertainment resources. We think about what Art Swigo brings to our campus and the opportunities to see all kinds of performing arts, the visual arts in the gallery, the connection we now have to downtown Oswego in terms of the visual arts as well. And really the outreach that happens in this community. Think about Oswego Renaissance and the group and their connection to many people at the college and what they've had that, and the connection of many people at the college and the Children's Museum in Oswego, right? And bringing enrichment there. And then with our Syracuse branch, expanding that into the Syracuse area. A source of expertise, I often get contacted in terms of everything about economics. In terms of that. And I think there's a lot of expertise to be the go-to, right? And so better kind of categorizing or getting the database of experts and really letting the media know. And I think quick responses and willingness to talk to the media quickly makes you the go-to, good or bad. I found out to my advantage, disadvantage, that, you know, the fact that you answer quickly and are willing to be a source or a resource begins to feed on itself, and it begins to give this visibility, right? The visibility of the expertise as well. And that visibility of expertise actually translates into reputation, which is our last one, but we'll stand to that. And this regional presence is not just Oswego, it extends to the greater region. It's not just Syracuse, you know, central New York. You know, we're building this technology corridor. There's this funding for it. There's, you know, the research there's the resources that the chip industry really needs that other places of the country won't have, namely fresh water, right? And so that builds this connection across the regional presence that has this potential for a lot of SUNYs. And that regional presence, we hear a lot about Micron, the tech corridor, the chip industry, what it can mean for the region. And my concern is in these conversations the past year or so that certain fields or academic disciplines thinks, well, that doesn't include me and I'm left out because I'm not technology or I'm not STEM. But you understand that this brings people to the region. It brings people that need all sorts of education and experiences, et cetera. So, I mean, it's not really just Micron, it's Micron or the chip industry and what it brings to the region. So it's actually overall, you know, population and economic growth in the region. And the draw to that might be the chip industry, but people need to remember that that growth comes with a demand for workers and experiences, cultural, entertainment experiences, and et cetera, across all different kinds of people. People might come for tech jobs and they bring families, and those families might not be interested in technology careers, right? And those families need health services and they go to school and they need teachers and all sorts of things, right? and they want to experience the arts and entertainment and people that bring it to them as well. And with that growth would come construction and the need to manage that construction and the resources that go into that. So it is my hope too in the planning process that kind of comes out, because we get sick of hearing the name Micron, but you would be more sick of hearing me saying, population or economic growth, that's actually going to be triggered by the chip industry. That's whole long. We need some sexy, entertaining acronym for that, right? But that's really what it is. And if you understand that's really what it is, you understand that there's a place for everyone to kind of really benefit and be lifted along with this community because of these exciting changes. Anything else that you think would be focused for a regional presence? All right. Well, the regional presence really well connects to this idea of once you have the regional presence, you cultivate this reputation, right? And this is really another thing that it doesn't happen by accident, right? So, you cultivate a reputation. I think cultivating is a deliberate verb choice. And Sandy, the verb maiden, would be very proud of us in this verb choice, because it's really about, you might have everything, you might have all the pieces for the reputation you deserve. I mean, we were brainstorming in the steering committee, we kind of bookmarked this by the reputation we deserve. And that's probably not the best title. It's a little self-serving, but it's true. It's ideas like we have actually all of these pieces, right? And educate people who've worked here a long time know the education of acceptable quality, know the transformation that takes place for the students that come and take these opportunities. We've seen, and we actually have data on the upward mobility of our students over time. We have alumni leaders, right? Business leaders, community leaders, innovators, patent holders, artists, media influencers, right? All across this very engaged alumni, right? As a result of things in the first three bullets. So we know that we have all the pieces, right? And so, but you can't expect to have all the pieces and the reputation come to you. I think a lot of institutions, particularly institutions of higher education that have gotten certain reputations, actively cultivate them. They cultivate the visibility, they cultivate the brand and the image that leads to this reputation. So we deserve this, but it happens through what really I would call purposeful actions and practices about really what's going on. And in terms of, even if you look at local journalism and local media, I would bemoan the hollowing out of local media and things like, and the damage that has happened because of that. But one of the things is true is that local and regional media are always hungry for content that people give to them, right? And so purposeful actions and practice would make sure that we become the media's best friend of, here's this free, beautifully written content about how awesome we are. If you would like to publish that, that would be great. But that reputation then makes the rest of this easier. We're talking about resourcing for growth, the resources you need to maintain this vibrant faculty and staff. But once you have the reputation, it becomes easier to leverage. It's easier to leverage for resources and enrollment. And of course, with enrollment, the dollars come follow those students too, as well to our system, right? As well as, foundation accounts and things like that. So really kind of taking this regional, that we are the go-to, we are the de facto for this region here, and building a reputation off of that makes a lot of parts of these easier, makes it able to achieve more of our priorities, right? Makes the decisions, the prioritization decisions, a little less painful because the resources are going to be there. Anyone have anything they'd like to add for the reputational area? No? Well, let me follow up. So seeing these anchors, do you think there's something left out? Something that we should make sure any of these anchors kind of pays attention to, or something that you don't readily see in these anchors that we make sure gets a focus somewhere? Any thoughts? Something you were hoping to see, you didn't see? No. Okay. All right. I'm gonna say that's good. Once again, silence is good. All right. Because I said so. So what are these people trying to do, right? I'm a doer. I'm an operationalizer, right? So, when I am early on as a younger faculty sitting in these planning meetings, as we vision about what we're about and what we want to be, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Right. And then these, like, they were planning. I'm like, no, seriously, what am I supposed to do? I would like a list with a little checklist. Drove me crazy. But as I got better, got better at seeing planning to operations, it's important for people serving on these anchors and people who are inputting in focus groups to come. Well, what are we trying to get out of the subcommittee work? Approximately you're looking at 10 goals or outcomes that you think in that area. And with that, articulate some of the strategies that might go with it and how we might measure. What should we be looking for if we're making progress in a that is measurable, right? What kind of things that are measurable can help us understand how close we're getting. And there are some obvious metrics, like in area 1, we're going to be looking at, you look at retention, you look at graduation rates, right? You might look at credit, the rate of credit completion. You might look at other academic indicators, academic probation, or things like that. You could look at experiences with Excel and study abroad. Research experience, student conference presentations, right? So there's a lot of metrics that we could use to kind of measure some successes in those areas. Other things might be harder to capture as well. So helping us in this process, we actually have a pair of consultants that come through ASCU. So ASCU has a lot of resources and programs to help higher ed institutions through the self-study process. In this case, ASCU is really, I don't know if you call it a partner, if that's the right word, Scott, with the Gates Foundation and the Post-Secondary Value Commission. So one of these things these facilitators are also doing is trying to connect our work to the Post-Secondary Value Commission. And if you saw earlier from my little 3 columns, that's it's pretty easy to do. It's something we kind of already value. So I think it's there, but they're looking to help make these connections. And in choosing these facilitators to help us and really looking at the post-secondary value stuff, it also comes with a little money. So a little financial help in terms of overhead expenses in this process as well. So Gates Foundation mean money, mean we cooperate. So we have 2, and they come from progressive experiences in higher ed. And so this is something I'm going to emphasize again. Strategic planning often has its home in corporate and can lapse into corporate speak, which speaking as faculty and knowing a lot of the faculty in this group really, really hate. But we're here to actually focus this on higher education and what it does for an institution, a public higher education institution. And we actually have 2 facilitators with a wealth of experience in public higher education institutions. So Dr. Timothy Motet is actually recently, as of last month, is President Emeritus of CSU Pueblo. So he was actually president for many years there, and just recently at the end of 2023 has retired. And Dr. John Jasinski, who is President Emeritus of Northwest Missouri State and currently the Provost at Missouri State University, which, as I told him multiple times, are not the best Missouri State universities. Truman State University is the best one. Class of 1990, go Bulldogs. So we've been having that conversation. But my point is that the facilitators even leading this process come from the point of view of leadership in public higher education as well. And they're not here to tell us what we're about, and they're not here to tell us what the answer is. They're here to kind of keep us on track with the process and with the focus. So the role of the facilitators is kind of guiding the plan development. And that's one of the reasons they're going to meet next week with our anchor groups, and they're going to sort of charge them and kind of focus their work, do a lot of questioning about, identity and focus and what they think should be embedded in this anchor and how they'd like to go forward. And they're connecting these elements to this post-secondary value commission as well. Once we get data or feedback through our anchors, they'll also be working with steering committee, which includes VPs, right? And they'll work with the president to help understand how you operationalize the plan. So we have a plan crafted from broad input about what the priorities of this institution would be, and what we'd like to accomplish within those priorities, and how we might measure it, but how do you operationalize that? And this is really why the steering committee is leadership heavy. See the vice presidents on the steering committee and some other unit heads, because it's really the steering committee that has to look at this input from our anchor subcommittees and decide, as they operationalize it, what is feasible, right? What can we expect to do during, a plan's lifespan. Strategic plan lifespans are really 5 or 6 years. Ours have actually been on life support and have extended past 5 or 6 years. That's okay. But so that's really and they keep us on task and they keep us focused, which I'm just going to speak for myself as among the co-chairs. I kind of needed a lot. So periodically they meet with us and they say, focus, right? And the strategy tacticized practice spelling out needed resources to achieve outcomes. So Prabhakar, could you expand on that a little bit?
No, you had the tactics and outcomes, goals, what is the method. I think a logical addition to that is, okay, these are the goals, this is how we know we achieved this. This is what we need in order to achieve this.
Okay. Thank you. So I told you how we've come so far. So what's happening in the next step? So in the next 2 months, we're going to be, oh, yes, Sandy?
Just a quick question. I mean, we've had multiple, strategic plans about every 5 years. Is this the first time we're hiring consultants? And if so, why?
Okay. So I don't know how far back, but let's go back. I'm going to go back. So before we started the middle states process in 2019, so around 2016, we did just a refresh, and Christy Eck, I believe, was kind of heading the refresh of the strategic plan going in. And I think we'd hoped to do a full planning, and COVID just kind of pushed that back a little bit. The other strategic planning process actually was before that, was led by an employee of the institution whose name completely escapes. Nancy, was it Nancy? Anyway, it was actually someone who worked in community relations and planning sector. And she basically, kind of got full release to sort of do that full time. And she, as an experience in facilitating focus groups, et cetera, she was actually in charge of that. So using external consultants gives us 2 things. Nancy Bellows, thank you, Michelle Bandla, good with names, appreciate that. So I believe Nancy Bellows actually led a strategic planning process prior to that. And then after that, I was too junior and honestly wasn't paying attention. So there you go. So I don't know if we've ever hired external, but see, this would be the first time in really my senior faculty memory, Sandy. I think part of it is there are a lot of unfilled positions on this campus, right? In all kinds of areas. So bringing in an external consultant to kind of oversee the group was, I think, hopefully a big advantage. And I would kind of recognizes well-being of the people that work here in terms of what can be done. I also think, and I would just say an external view. So having one of the usual suspects be in charge of the process, right? They've been here a long time. And maybe a fresher external view and how the process is going and how we're making decisions. And then finally, this opportunity through ASCU connected with the Post-Secondary Value Commission also came with some financial support. So, some money. I know, Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I was writing it.
Okay, there it is. There it is.
The facilitators, at least based on what I've heard from them at this point, they're not here to get into the nitty-gritty of what we want and what we talk about. They're really there to provide some procedural guardrails to keep us moving, right? And could someone else do that? Could someone internally do that? Sure. But it does provide a little bit of an external, these are folks who have been doing strategic planning in other contexts. A lot of new people here that perhaps have not done strategic planning in their lives. And being able to bring, some of that outside expertise is probably not a bad thing. And I think will help us procedurally as we're trying to move forward.
Yep. I would agree with that. And I would even say there have been a few things they've suggested, some things, and I think even within the steering committee or some feedback from the co-chair saying that's probably not the way we want to go. Early on, we had a discussion that one of the anchor committees might be guiding statements. So do we have an anchor committee that looks at the mission and values? Do we want some value statements? Do we need to change our mission and vision? And we felt like we're kind of attached to the mission and vision we kind of have, and let's start the planning process based on that. And if the outcome of these investigations and these discussions suggests we need to revisit it, then we do it at the end. But it was interesting, one of the consultants suggests when you articulate values or a new vision at the beginning, then it sets the stage for what follows. And I said, I think we have a good sense of what we're about. I don't think any of these anchors are particularly surprising or shocking. So let's explore and then go back and see if we need to revisit it as a result, right? Kind of inductive versus deductive approaches. So already I think the consultant suggested things that we didn't think fit well to the culture or the institutional kind of memory of this committee, of this institution. And so really they're not dictating the process. They're here to guide us, and in some ways they ask a lot of the right questions and keep us on task. And so the anchor committees meet with consultants next week. We have a couple dates, and then they're going to facilitate focus groups in January and February. We're going to do a week of virtual Zoom sessions for people that might not be on campus or do not come to campus often. Hopefully that'll be maybe the last week there in January that we'll do that. We will have on-site, so February 7th, 8th, I think the consultants are getting ready to fly in. We're going to schedule some on-site focus groups early on. And so these focus group invitations are going to be to everyone on the campus to come in. We're going to sort of organize by anchor. And those potentially are intended, they're not really restricted, but they'll be intended for faculty and staff. And we'll have special sessions for external groups. Right, I could say external stakeholders, but I will share that I hate the word stakeholders. So it's a little too corporate for me. So we'll look for a synonym later. But these external members, right, with connection to the institution, alumni, board, foundation board, college council, community, etc. And then a special session just for students. And I think the facilitators pointed out, which was a helpful point, is when you get a critical mass of faculty and staff, we start talking in our academic ease, higher ed language, and then the external or the students kind of feel disengaged and feel left out by that. So they'll be welcome to come to the other sessions potentially, but we're going to have special sessions just for them, just so we have one just to hear the student voice, right? Because students aren't going to be thinking in terms of these anchors and these areas the way they do. They're just going to talk about what they like about the school, what they don't like about the school. So I told the facilitators, be ready to hear about some food, because you're going to hear about food. Okay. So, and things like that. So that's really the plan, to gather information, in the broadest way we can as people come in. We hope you will come to a focus group, right? So we will send out invitations, and as you come to a focus group, it'll be a broader discussion, more interactive about what kind of outcomes are important. How do we move towards the outcome, right? Resources needed, right? What are the challenges in reaching these incomes? Resources needed, right? So they will, and again, our facilitators will sort of be focusing that discussion. So we can kind of collect that qualitative data to inform what our future priorities should look like, and what it looks like in terms of achievements, in terms of funding those achievements, and in terms of measuring those achievements. Got anything else for me? Oh, I'm 3 minutes over.
Oh, no,
but
you're
that's
good.
okay, because I was 5 minutes late. But, all right. So.
Liz, I just wanted to make a point on and perhaps some thought given to the ways these anchors interrelate.
Mm-hmm.
Seems as if you really can't do student success strategies without resources. Those student successes affect our reputation. Our reputation affects our student success. Relationships with external entities like Micron, if they build a clean room here on campus, affects our reputation. I mean, all of these things connect, and I'd like to see us actually look for those connections across these anchors.
Okay, well, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about the interaction. We even see, the interaction between our priorities, SUNY's, and this post-secondary value commission. So I put some talented graphic designers on high alert that there's so going to be an interactive graphic. It'll be multicolored, there'll be circles, there'll be arrows, it'll be beautiful. I will not design it because I wouldn't even know where to start. But the idea is one of the ideas is a subcommittee does work. They come up with maybe 10 goals, outcomes, discussion about resources needed, etc. And then you put them together at a steering committee. and you say, and you look at where these interactions are. And you kind of refine what those goals and outcomes are based on the way they're intersecting. And where they might reside. If we stick with this anchor model is in our development, right? And then there's no rule that says you have to stick with it in the final report too. And given these interactions, we might go a different direction as well. So thank you. Press to share the slides. So actually send the slides to John and I'll ask him to post them next to the meeting recording in the CELT. And so. All right. Well, thank you for joining me this fine morning. I'm now going to finish moving my office. I'm not really looking forward to it, but it's a nicer office. There you go. Okay.